the April meeting of the Budget and Audit Committee. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes. Sandy sent those out just prior to this meeting, so you can review those and we'll approve those at the next meeting if that's all right. I'm going to go ahead and move up into our business. Just go ahead and move up the vehicle lease proposal from Enterprise. We've got Mary Elizabeth here. Ms. Rowe is going to give us a presentation from Enterprise on some fleet management. I know a number of our council persons have been interested in this, and the mayor as well, and so we're interested to hear from you.
Absolutely.
I think you muted
Sure.
him on our end, Sandy.
I'm sorry, say again.
I think when you mute on the phone, you mute our end of it so you can't hear us, but we can hear
Sure.
you. He would have to mute for us not to hear him. I think that's right.
I muted it.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Like you mentioned, I'm Mary Elizabeth. Grew up just down the street in Humboldt, so very familiar with the area. But I appreciate this opportunity, and I know you guys have several items on your agenda, so probably just going to take up about 10 to 15 minutes, and then if there's any questions, then I'm happy to answer those as well. But just a quick overview, I am with Enterprise Fleet Management. We are the sister division of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which everybody knows. We actually started as a fleet management company, though, so that's kind of where I come into play. But I've been with Enterprise for almost 16 years. It's my only job out of college, and I've been in our fleet management division now for almost 8 years. So really appreciate this opportunity. You guys have the packets in front of you. There's a couple slides that I think are probably the most important, and I'm going to jump to those in just a second, but I did want to tell you about some of the partners that we have today across the state. So I work with cities, counties, housing authorities, school systems, but then also construction companies, HVAC companies, healthcare companies, to basically make sure they're operating their fleet as efficiently as possible. When you have 300 plus, almost 400 vehicles, it's a huge asset to the city. We want to make sure those are operating as efficiently as possible. So some of the partners I have across the state are Hamilton County, Rutherford County. We just brought on the city of Chattanooga, the city of Crossville, the town of Livingston. A couple school systems would be Hawkins County Board of Education, Hamilton County Board of Education, just brought on Knox County Board of Education. And then this week, actually, Knox County itself will be coming on board. I just got some quotes signed for those folks. And then I'm in talks with McKinsey, Union City, Memphis Shelby County Schools now, which is a huge partnership potential there. So it's definitely something that has grown across the state. And typically it's because all governments are trying to figure out how can we do more with less. The budget is always somehow strapped, and typically what gets kicked down the road about as far as it can go are vehicles. And then they end up costing you more money than they should. So again, as Enterprise, we buy and sell over 1 million vehicles every single year. It's what we do on a day in and day out basis. I would like to think we are the experts at this. So we're really just taking our best practices and kind of funneling them down to our clients. So that's a very quick, brief overview of what we do and why we do it for our clients. So a couple things. So on your second slide, this is up on the screens as well. This is everything I can do for you, right? This is not everything you have to do. Think about going down to Doe's and it's a menu option and you can just pick and choose. When you acquire and fund vehicles through us, the city has access to everything else. I've met with Bobby a couple of different times and we've talked about some of the processes that are already in play. I understand that the city has a city garage, that you currently use bulk fueling tanks. I'm not trying to take anybody's job at all. We just want to see, are there any ways that I can help you potentially be more efficient? So again, we can do all of your license, title, and registration, any vehicle aftermarket, which for your police vehicles would mean all of their upfit configurations, service bodies for pickup trucks. We do have some options for maintenance. Again, not trying to take anything away from the garage, but would it help your garage if we could outsource some to the local community, push some tax dollars back to the local community, and alleviate maybe some pressure that's on your city garage? Maybe. And then I know the city is self-insured, so again, that's perfect. That follows most of my clients as well. And then on the back end of things, we basically resell your vehicles as well. This graph is probably one of the ones that really shows, it's the best visualization, because most of my government clients operate in that red box. They have depreciated a vehicle out as much as it can go. They have lost their resale value, and then their fuel and maintenance costs are starting to get a little too high. So my goal is really just to start helping you inch over to the left, getting to that optimal time to replace, to where you've gotten the most out of the vehicle, but it's still worth the most. And government vehicles, because of your lower mileage patterns, typically are worth more on the open market, and puts you in a better equitable position because of the better buying power that you have as well. So, any questions so far? Okay. The one thing I also wanted to say about our structure is it is an open-ended lease. Sometimes the word lease is a little scary to people, but if you were to go lease a vehicle for your personal vehicle, it comes with mileage penalties, wear and tear penalties. There's a lot of penalties, and that is not what our structure is. It's an open-ended lease structure, to meaning that there's no wear and tear penalties, no early term penalties. The biggest thing, there's no mileage penalties. The other piece to this is all of the equity belongs to the city of Jackson. Enterprise only always cares about being made whole for a vehicle. Anything above and beyond that comes back to the city, whereas in a normal lease at a dealership, a net lease, a closed-in lease, that money goes back to the dealership. So those are the biggest differences. No wear and tear, no mileage penalties. You guys have the equity option, okay? From a maintenance standpoint, just because I did see a few heads nod and was saying, hey, could we alleviate some maintenance maybe? We partner with thousands of shops across the state, well, across the country, but several here in the city of Jackson, because we do have 2 rental branches here. There's one in Lexington. There's one several spots, so we have to make sure we have plenty of maintenance vendors that can satisfy those needs for our rental cars. Basically, we have the ability to fix your maintenance cost up to 100,000 miles, minus your police vehicles. Those would be on a separate program just because they're obviously operated completely differently than a half-ton pickup truck. But what this would allow you to do is to, again, maybe pull some of that pressure out of your garage. Maybe they only handle XYZ departments, and then a random oil change is not going to the city garage where they're probably paying maintenance, you're paying labor and all that for a $25 oil change or for a $65 oil change. So again, we have that option, very simple. Enterprise, it's a fixed monthly rate that would be attached to the depreciation schedule, and then that covers all major minor repairs, 24/7 roadside assistance. So it is meant to be more of an all-inclusive, stress-free, worry-free program. The other piece to that is, how could I help you with the vehicles that you own today and your police vehicles? This is more of our maintenance management program where everything is passed through at cost. So what that means is your folks would go into our facilities, and again, this is Firestone, Jiffy Lube, you name it, some of the mom and shops, Golden Circle, anything like that. We would facilitate those repairs on your behalf. We would connect with our ASE certified mechanics to make sure that they are the right repair for the right price. And then we actually pay those shops up front on your behalf. And then that comes back to the city of Jackson on a consolidated monthly invoice. The reason I think that's important, with as many vehicles as you guys have, you're not getting 50 to 60 to 70 invoices, POs, receipts, whatever that looks like per month. You're getting one consolidated invoice back from Enterprise that can still be broken down vehicle by vehicle, month to date, year to date, life to date. So again, it's a way to, like I keep saying, just pull some pressure off of your current maintenance facility. 6 mechanics, we typically think that a mechanic works for about 50 pieces of equipment. So if you're looking at it that way, the city's probably a little behind when it comes to the mechanic piece. And I used to hire, in West Tennessee, I used to hire all of the rental car branch employees. The mechanic position and the auto tech position at our airport was the hardest position I ever had to hire for. Just not that many folks out there that have some of those specialty trades degrees now. So again, that's how the maintenance operates. At the end of the day, we just ask that the vehicle be maintained. So if you guys say, hey, listen, we're going to do everything in our in-house shop, perfectly fine. We just ask that whatever the manufacturer recommends, that it gets seen every 5,000 to 6,000 miles. That's all. Any questions on that piece? Okay. And the one thing I did not mention at the very beginning that is very important, and Bobby knows this, but Enterprise is the highest awarded vendor for Sourcewell. Sourcewell is a purchasing cooperative that the city of Jackson is already a member of, which helps alleviate any due diligence or compliance issues as they've already been vetted out by Sourcewell. It's how our government business has been able to grow as rapidly as it has, because they haven't had to go to RFP, go to bid. It literally satisfies all of that procedural stuff for them. Okay. Next slide is just a quick graph about the fuel degradation. I'll skip that one. The resale side of everything, again, very important to our business. If you think about it, when we're buying and selling 1 million plus vehicles per year, if we can make an extra $500 somewhere, that's huge to our bottom line. So the difference for us is we are not out selling your vehicles via auction the majority of the time. We are going to be hand selling those directly to our local dealership base here. It may be all of West Tennessee, it may be some in the Middle Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, but that's how we're able to drive the prices up for your vehicles, is by hand selling and marketing those vehicles to those around the community. Versus right now, most of the time you guys are probably putting vehicles back through gov deals or maybe just local community auctions. You are not getting the best return for your vehicles. And that's how Enterprise makes its money. It's not the $25 rental, or these days probably the $85 rental. It's how do we cycle those vehicles out? Let's buy them really well. Let's hold on to them for the preventative cycle, preventative world of maintenance, and then let's get rid of them when they are at their highest value. Not buy them very well, hold them for 15 years, and then get rid of them. At that point, you've lost all your value. So, okay. So this next piece is the financial model that, again, Bobby and I have gone over multiple times, just to get a quick snapshot of what your fleet looks like today. It's a great exercise in general, just to see what the city has today, where your assets are. So if you'll look at this, on the left-hand side, it's going to show you all of the different types of vehicles that the city has. It's going to show you the number of those vehicles, the average age of those vehicles, and then the average annual mileage of those vehicles. So you can see you guys have 462 vehicles in our niche. Our niche is like the 1 ton and below area. Even though I can do some 4 and 5 and 650s, my niche is going to be your 1 ton and below, plus your police vehicles. You'll notice over to the right-hand side on the top, this is how we would recommend replacing your vehicles. Anything year one would be if it's a 15-year-old or older vehicle or over 150,000 miles. You guys have a lot, right? You have 230. We're practically half of your fleet is over 10 years old. And what I don't want you to come away with is like, oh, we're doing something really wrong. You might be a little bit, but all of my government entities look just like this. They really do. And so this is how we set up the plan. And so then in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, that's how you come across with the different vehicles that we would recommend replacing. There were 3 vehicles, which I'm really surprised there were only 3 vehicles that we came across being underutilized. That just means they're going less than 1,000 miles per year. Now, they may be a specialty vehicle. They are your larger vehicles, so they may be boom trucks or something to where they're really not going a lot of mileage, but they're necessary. So the biggest thing, when you look at this on that bottom graph there, is that 280 vehicles are over 10 years old, period. You've got 81 vehicles that are over 20 years old. The biggest thing that says to me is there's probably some safety issues with those vehicles. Typically, your modern safety features, the ones that we consider modern, so side airbags, electronic stability control, some of those things started in 2011. So over half of your fleet does not have those at this point. Those are probably your biggest offenders. They're probably getting maintenance work done that should not be there. They should be gotten rid of. They have no value. So again, this is just how we want to look at it. And if you look at your last 5 or 6 or 7 years of your buying pattern, if you continue to buy like that, the city will never catch up. And that's the biggest thing, is that how you're doing it today will not sustain you for the next 10 years. So any questions on this? Because everything from here flows into the financial model. Go ahead.
Question on this. I noticed you said we've got 3 that are underutilized. That means they're being used less than 1,000.
Mhm.
So 462 vehicles that are 1 ton or below.
Mhm.
I guess when I saw that, I was just thinking, wow, that's a lot of vehicles.
Mhm.
But from what you've looked at, we're really, I guess, technically we don't have too many vehicles for a city
I mean,
our
not when
size.
you look at mileage usage at this point.
Okay.
I've done some of these where they've had 300 to 400 vehicles and they have 10% that are underutilized. So with that being
So it's all based
said,
off mileage?
it's all
hourly,
based on
okay.
mileage and their model year. So again, that vehicle still has 11,000 miles on it, but it's probably a 10-year-old vehicle, so it's averaging less than 1,000 miles a
Yeah,
year.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, have we done any type of inventory study in the last 5 to 10 years or anything like that?
I don't think the last 5 to 10 years of inventory study, when we look at, what each department requires and uses, and some of those, some of those trucks, they're utilized like a street department, sometimes they have to use 2 trucks for one job.
Yeah.
For the equipment purposes, they can only hold so much. So, talking about some of those trucks, I think in our capital plan, looking at those animal control and things like that, those are the ones that are 20-plus years old that brakes aren't working You know, she says safety issues, we're thinking totally different. She's talking about safety features, I'm talking about actual issues. With the vehicles, that if the
Yeah.
brakes aren't working properly, the engines aren't working properly, those are actually safety issues that we have.
Sure. Okay.
The other thing that this can also show you is if you look at that, there are a lot of different types of vehicles across the city. The one thing that you can do here is also try to start standardizing a little bit. When I look at this, I see 4 different types of half-ton pickup trucks, right? So the thought there is, do you need all 4 types? Like, is a standard truck maybe going with the extended cab? Do we really need 4-wheel drive here in Jackson? Maybe, I don't know. I guess when we're gonna go out and, 4-wheel or whatever. But it gives you an opportunity to see what do we have and do we really need what we have. Our analysis, which you'll see next, is based on like-for-like vehicle replacement. So this is probably a little worst-case scenario, because if we go through and we say, hey, listen, we don't really need 4-wheel drive trucks on this, we could get away with 2-wheel drive. There right now is probably a $4,000 to $5,000 difference in acquisition cost between a 2 and a 4-wheel drive truck.
Okay.
So as we move forward, just think of this as probably worst-case scenario.
So not to jump ahead to
Yeah.
the numbers, but if we were to really dig into it and figure out, hey, we don't need these 4 types of
Yep.
pickups, we could consolidate that and there's potential for more savings?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep,
Gotcha.
correct. And you guys may look at this and say, hey, listen, even though you only show there's 3 underutilized, we may have 40 that are underutilized. Maybe it's time to kind of really look at our fleet, dig in, and see if we need to get rid of some vehicles,
Okay.
And what was the underutilization criteria
1,000
Less
miles per year.
per year?
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
over its life.
It's probably hard to read. That's it, though.
Okay.
You definitely cannot read that. So,
Yes, we may have vehicles that were
Bobby,
used,
you could read it.
5, 6 years ago, and then now they're not used
Sometimes.
at all.
correct.
Depends on what I've done
Yeah.
before I try.
Yeah. So,
It could be a 10-year-old vehicle that had.
so I would probably recommend, don't look at this page, because I don't see how you can read this, but you may just want to turn around and look at the big screen or the other screens, but this is the financial model, and this is what we put together for all of our government clients. The top portion is based on our assumptions, so again, you have a current fleet of 462. Our recommendation is dropping down to 459 based on mileage usage. The current cycle is almost 18 years. So that's what I meant. If you go back and you look at your last 5 to 6 years of buying patterns, it would take the city 18 years to replace its entire fleet. It's way too long, right? Your annual mileage pattern is 11,000. That also makes you different than commercial customers, because typically their annual mileage is 25 to 30,000. That's why your vehicles hold their value better than theirs. Okay. We are proposing an average cycle of right under 4 years. That's going to be an average of vehicles having a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year term. That's why it's a weird number, 3.93. Your maintenance cost is a blended average of assumptions from us. It's based on the fact that you have 6 full-time mechanics, an average salary for a mechanic, and then average parts prices. 27 cents a mile, honestly, is probably very conservative on our side, considering how many police vehicles are in this analysis. Typically, we see police vehicles in that 33 cents a mile range, and so it's a blended average of everything. We believe we can get your maintenance costs down to about $65 per month on average, assuming your police fleet is probably about $100 per month per vehicle. That's our assumption based on the thousands of maintenance invoices we have for our vehicles and for our clients.
Those 6 mechanics, are those employed by you?
Nope, those are yours.
So okay.
Those are
Do we
yours.
have, how many mechanics do we have right now?
You should have 6.
Okay.
Yep. That's
Oh,
based
that's
on your
based on
numbers.
current.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
That's based on my discussions with some of your team earlier. That's
Okay.
how you operate today.
Gotcha.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
You said earlier it's per vehicle, the maintenance, and then you just said $65. Is
Mhm.
that per vehicle?
It's per vehicle. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
A month.
Yes, ma'am.
Per month.
Yep. So you'll see when we get down into these other numbers, the reason we do it per month is so you can see the calculations a little bit better. So on average, that is the yellow line in your packet. It says, okay, we're going to replace 26 vehicles per year, because that is your average, which gives you a purchase price of a little over $1 million. If you divide out the math, it's probably a $33,000 to $35,000 vehicle, which is way less than obviously your police vehicles that are going to be $50,000 to $55,000, $60,000.
You're in the ballpark, yeah.
So if you look over your maintenance column, that number is based on the 250 of your cost to date times your number of vehicles, okay? Same thing with your fuel. It's based on $4 a gallon right now at 10 miles per gallon for the year. and your mileage patterns. And then so the overall fleet budget for the city, based on those assumptions, is a little under $4.5 million to operate like you do today. Does that seem reasonable? Okay. So year 2022, or as I like to just say year one, because no matter, when the program would start, but year one, we want to get rid of those 3 vehicles. So you see that number drop to 459 on your fleet size, and it stays that way. Here's the big number of 230, right? So when we identified those vehicles that were over 150,000 miles, over 15 years old, there were 230 of them. So our recommendation is that 230 vehicles are replaced in year one, which means the city would still own half your fleet. 229 vehicles, there will be 230 on lease. Your purchase budget just moves, right? It literally just moves to a leasing budget. Now the leasing budget is about 2.1 million for 230 vehicles versus 1.1 million for 26 vehicles that you're paying cash for. The equity columns, again, there's obviously some value left to your vehicles, right? So what we want to account for is what should be coming back into your fleet budget. So you'll see a current fleet equity analysis done at the bottom, and that was done by our fleet strategy manager based on today's fair market values. The 230 vehicles we estimate are probably still worth around $332,000, plus the 3 underutilized are worth about $14,500. So when you add those together, $346,000 from those vehicles sold should be coming back to the city. You also see the column of equity leased. Those are vehicles that we are recommending you rotate out every year, at least for year one, because of how well they're holding their value. My guess is if I look on the next slide, it's going to be half-ton pickup trucks. The market's crazy right now for those, right? Your maintenance budget drops by about $500,000 because you're operating a half newer fleet that should really only be going in for oil changes, rotations, things like that. And then your fuel budget also drops by $230-ish thousand because now you're operating higher fuel efficiency vehicles. So in year one, if the recommendation was followed, and it could be followed, you guys would improve your fleet budget by a little more than $350,000. The thought process is the same all the way down, right? So when you get to year 2026, at that point, everything is on lease with Enterprise, right? So that's why you see your leasing budget flatline where it is. The last year of the equity in your current vehicles, that's when that comes through, of that $500,000. And then after that, all of the equity is coming in the form of vehicles that are sold by Enterprise that were on lease with us. Your maintenance budget will start to flatline, same with your fuel. And so it gives you your overall fleet budget. You will see 3 years in there of where your fleet budget is more than it is today. But to be honest with you, your fleet budget based on your replacement cycle right now is probably not enough as it is. So if you added 3 or 4 or 6 more vehicles into that 26, we'd probably be an even flush all the way down. So long story short, there's a lot of opportunity here. It's a great opportunity for the city to move to kind of, from a taxpayer standpoint, you're going to be operating safer, more reliable, newer vehicles for less money out the door. If you guys were to go and purchase 230 vehicles, I was a liberal arts major. I did really like math. It's a lot of money. I don't know what the number is, but it's a lot of money. And a lot of times that much money cannot be devoted to vehicles. There's more projects, buildings, employees that need to be trained and hired across the city versus putting money into vehicles. Any questions on this? And one more thing I want to say. This includes moving 140 Chargers, is that right? That you had? We have Chargers. Moving 140 Chargers to 140 police interceptors. Big difference in cost when you look at the Charger and how much it costs versus an interceptor and how much it costs to upfit. All of that's factored into this already.
A couple of questions.
Sure.
And thanks, Ms. Rowe, for doing this. It was helpful looking through this. The thing you already touched on that I was thinking through was with our garage maintenance, especially recently with some specialty projects they've had to work on with leaf blowers and
Just heavier duty
other
equipment,
so,
yeah.
So I think there potentially could be the big benefit there with our garage to offload that from them. But in terms of the open-end lease, and then these numbers are based off 10-year projections.
Correct.
So roughly like annually, if we went with this plan, you're saving about $140,000 a year over the next 10 years.
Yep.
If you break that down. With the open-ended lease, how does that play out? Are we reviewing that annually? Because I'm assuming there's given to adding and
Absolutely.
every single year.
Because you guys may need to add officers, you may need to add
Yeah.
departments, things like that. So how we are set up is I'm a senior account executive.
Okay.
My counterpart is the client strategy manager. Between the two of us, we are the ones coming and sitting down with you guys 2 to 3 times a year during the budget process with your department heads. That's how a lot of times it works. That way they can come to you with ideas about what they need versus just, thinking of anything at that point. So
Right.
yeah, our job is to help 2 to 3 times a year, 4 times a year, really sit down and make the best recommendations, because year over year, vehicle manufacturers, the ones that are the lowest total cost of ownership, will change. Like, they're all trying to compete with each other, compete for
Sure.
market share. So this OEM, which is just Ford, GM, something like that, they may offer such incentives for year 2. Year 5, Ram may have come and said, hey, listen, we're gonna blow it out of the water this year.
Yeah.
So it's our job to bring those recommendations to you, make tweaks where we need to, and to really make sure it's still fitting the pattern and the structure of what you need it to fit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in terms of, you're talking about replacing
Mm-hmm.
some of the chargers, or in the last year or so, have you guys experienced any issues not being able to get vehicles with a shortage? Because I know we had a big issue with when we ordered police cars and we thought we were going to get them at this point, and delays, so, and I know everybody's dealing with that, but,
The answer is yes.
okay,
I wish we were special enough to be able to say no, but
Sure.
we're not.
okay.
Great question. It is something that everyone is experiencing across every industry, whether it's chip shortage, labor shortage, right? That's a big one with the manufacturers. A lot of them have not been able to go back to a 3-shift day because they don't have enough employees. So whether it's chip shortages, labor shortages, parts sitting on boats and oceans, you name it, we are experiencing some delays there. We are in contact with the manufacturers every single day. For example, today was when GM was supposed to open their 1/2-ton, 3/4-ton, and 1-ton pickup trucks. Yesterday said, hey, we're delaying that until May 25th. We have no control over that.
Sure.
All we can do is take the information, divvy it up, and say, okay, what can we do now? So we're in the process of, with all of our clients, going through all of their GM orders today and saying, what do you need? Because as soon as that floodgate opens on the 23rd or 5th, it's not going to stay open very long.
Yeah,
Same thing with Ford, same thing with, it's a matter of how can I get the information to you and what can we do with it?
right.
Yeah, it's not great. Now, on the flip side, your used vehicles are gonna be, or your old vehicles are gonna be worth more than they're ever gonna be worth. We just gotta have something to be able to replace them with.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
so,
I did have a question on
Yeah, sure.
the maintenance part of the operating expense. You got the fixed monthly rate on maintenance up to 100,000 miles. What's it like after that? Because by my rough calculations, the fleet has about 450,000 miles a month.
so it's per vehicle.
It's just per vehicle.
Per vehicle, yeah, so it'd be up to 100,000 miles, and honestly, we don't want you to hold a vehicle past 100,000
Okay,
miles.
so that's per vehicle, that's not
It's per
for the
vehicle,
fleet
yes,
per month.
absolutely.
Okay.
Good question, yeah.
Yeah.
It would be per vehicle. If that were the case, that would not make sense for you.
Well, that's
Um,
what I.
But yes, it's per vehicle, and typically, based on your mileage pattern, you guys should be getting rid of vehicles between probably 40 and 50,000 miles, versus even getting close to that. That's in there also for our commercial customers, because they're going that higher mileage.
Ms. Rowe, a lot of good information here, and thank you for being so thorough with it. My question was, you'd listed a handful of municipalities that Enterprise currently works with. Have any of those relationships been over 5 years for the open-ended lease, to where you can look back at maybe projections given then and actually be able to see some of those projections come to fruition, and them actually be able to see those savings that were projected?
Sure. So my oldest partnership, government-wise, is probably Blount County.
Okay.
And so I came in 14. I want to say they came on board with us, I'm going to say 16-ish. Hamilton County came on board in 17. So they are right about at that 5-year mark. They replace they're a little bit of a different,
Well, and I don't mean to interrupt, but you had mentioned that it's not uncommon for a municipality to extend the useful
Oh,
life of their
absolutely.
vehicles.
yeah, absolutely.
15
but,
years.
But yeah, so Hamilton County's been with us now for about 5 years.
Okay.
Now, across the country, we have government partners that have definitely been with us through different cycles. Mine are probably getting to the point to where they're starting to cycle vehicles. Again, being completely transparent, here in Tennessee, we just didn't do a great job for a while of going after the government side because we didn't understand it. And so it's been probably a passion of mine over the last 4 or 5 years to get more involved with that, whether it's through conferences, things like that, to understand the government workings a little bit more. Our government business has probably quadrupled in 2 years here, and it's because we just have more of a focus on it.
And the
So-
financial benefit is strictly from the resale? Is there any other built-in?
Well, it's from your maintenance costs going
Yeah.
down, your fuel costs going down. and-
Well, I'm talking about for
y'all.
enterprise.
For y'all.
It's strictly on the resale?
Oh, so the resale money comes back to you.
Okay.
That's yours. We make our money, again, good question, right? Very transparent on this too. We make our money three different ways. One is directly from the manufacturer. Does nothing to your side at all. Interest and management fee. And through the Sourcewell contract, those have all been negotiated rates with its members
Right.
and us as a vendor. All of that is already included in this analysis.
Okay.
There are no hidden fees. If that were the case, I wouldn't be really happy with
Yeah.
who I worked for. But anyway, so that's what that piece looks like.
Okay.
The only other thing I want to show you is this, and I think we're about to wrap up, but this last page, or this next page, basically is an example of how which vehicles we would recommend replacing with. So again, you'll see over the second line down where it says 140 vehicle type, midsize SUV, that is where your Chargers were. So this is moving them all to the Police Interceptor. You'll notice 3 columns from the left where it says term. That's how we come up with how we're gonna replace those vehicles, and it's based on total cost of ownership, right? All of the half-tons are based on a 12-month term right now because of how well they're holding their value, but you also see 24, 36, and 60-month terms in there. The last column where it says one-time AME, that means aftermarket equipment cost. That's important because a lot of these vehicles are gonna have this type of equipment in them, and we wanted to account for that already in the analysis. So, we've already accounted for roughly $20,000 in equipment for all of the police vehicles. There's $3,000 for your F-250s, $10,000 for that 1-ton chassis, and $15,000 for the 24 1.5-ton chassis that you have in your fleet. All of that equipment cost is already factored in to the sheet before, because again, it wouldn't be fair if I didn't include that, and then later on we have this massive expense. So, again, this is for you guys. It can be sent to you, study it. There's a lot of numbers in here. The biggest thing is it's gonna take your cycle from 18 years to 4. It's huge, right? It's a big deal, while saving money at the same time. Puts you in better vehicles, safer vehicles, potential to utilize some of your local vendors here across the city for maintenance work. Again, if we're pulling some of the vehicles out of your city garage, it should reduce your downtime, should reduce for some need for spares. And overall, it's just gonna put you guys in a better position moving forward and be more efficient. So,
One other quick question.
Yeah.
Do any of the municipalities that you've worked with, do they all, at the initial process, go all in with all their vehicles? Or do any of them do, hey, we want to do kind of a trial run, like, hey, let's only focus on police vehicles?
So Knox
or
County's
pickup
doing
trucks, or-
38 to start with. I
Okay.
think my recommendation was like, I don't know, 150, right?
Gotcha.
It'd be great if you could, because it's the way to get, to be the most efficient, the fastest.
Right.
But it's a big bite to chew, right? I mean, I just said you should replace half your fleet in one
Right.
year.
So there's not a minimum
Nope.
that we have to, okay.
Absolutely not. You could come to me and say, hey, listen, we do want to run with this for these 50 vehicles or these 10 vehicles. If you do 10, you're not gonna learn enough out of it to do
Sure.
10. But yes, you dictate how many you want to do. I'm gonna make the recommendation, but you will always, as a city, have the last say, right? Even if it comes to the term of a vehicle, and I'm like, hey, we should really replace this vehicle, and someone says, hey, we're gonna hold on to it for another year, I'm gonna say, okay. We're never gonna mandate what you have to do with us. We're
Gotcha.
just there to make the recommendation as we see it.
Okay, thanks.
And so these numbers are based off current police fleet, and I'm kind of bringing Captain Benton into this. So current police fleet, there's been some discussions about some other benefits for our police officers, and that being a take-home vehicle. I don't think
Right, that's one.
we've really looked, that's not included in this, though, is it, as a potential? No.
And I just
And-
did this,
just-
yeah, for
yes,
Union City, they're wanting to include take-home
So
vehicles.
how many additional vehicles will we need to be able to establish that program?
Right now, we have 110 vehicles in our fleet, active police fleet, and that's not including the Chargers.
Right?
I think we're lacking, we've got some take-home cars that have been pushed down, and we're trying to push them down all the way to the officers that are on probation, doesn't have take-home cars, so we're trying to get them all in vehicles for the longevity of the vehicle.
Sure.
I think right now what we're lacking is another, probably another 40
Okay.
vehicles, and it would push us all the way down to
To
having
those,
everybody have take-home cars or assigned
right after,
vehicles.
assigned vehicles, right after they get off the probation period?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So how many was that?
Said 40.
40 others.
40 that would want,
Okay.
Well, so kind of looking at that, and in that, I'm gonna have to get to it. The term of those vehicles, you know,
60 months.
that, yeah, so you've got a 5-year term on those. That may be opportunity to push that some additional years if we have lower mileage take-home vehicles. That's one of the things we've been looking at, as far as police officer retention. So
And
that
I-
may be something that we have to discuss.
Sure.
And push for maybe a revised proposal.
And just so you know, just kind of, there are other cities talking about that. I was in Union City last week, and there's safety reasons behind it, right? If you've got someone that's got to come to the station to get a car to be able to go to a call, it is used as a retention and a recruiting tool. This is what I was hearing from the police chief there in Union City. So their cars are being run 24 hours a day, and they're getting burned, like run out pretty quickly. So that's some of their arguments behind adding those take-home vehicles. So it sounds like that's something that's kind of spreading.
Yeah, we're having to become more competitive for
To
those.
hire your officers, yeah.
Yes.
They said it's hard to hire officers right now.
Bobby, did
So-
you have any thoughts on that?
The last question?
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we need to be doing,
Absolutely.
you know, in my
Okay.
view, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer any other questions. That's all I have, though. I definitely don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you guys have other items, but as you look through this, as you dig in a little bit, if there are questions, Bobby's got all of my contact information. I'm happy to come back, would love to. Even if it's more of a workshop with a few folks that just want some more questions to be answered, but I'm happy to do so.
Well,
Just for the benefit of the committee
Yeah.
too, Captain Benton's been a part of this discussion.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Philip Evans from the garage has participated in the two, three
Mm-hmm.
Zoom meetings, and Greg Rowland sort of represented just kind of the general use department.
Yep.
with the
Mhm.
process.
We've had several good folks that have helped
Yeah.
really get this list to where it seems a pretty good list to look at, yeah. So,
Ms. Rowe, thank you. Any
Absolutely.
other questions for Ms. Rowe? Again, and if we, as we kind of go through
Mhm.
this and analyze this, and Bobby's office does as well, if there's any changes to this, we may have to come back and
absolutely, would
kind of
love to.
present another version of it.
The last thing I would leave you with is, the only thing we're being told right now from the different vehicle manufacturers is sooner than later. Right now, vehicles that are ordered are probably not gonna come in until Q2, Q3 of next year. So if we wait, it won't get better. And I know as a committee, you know, you guys are working on your budget for July 1, right? Just passing the information along that we are hearing as well, that's causing a little bit of turmoil with everybody, is that when you can act, because it's gonna be a long time before some vehicles come in.
Okay.
So, anyway, thank y'all so much.
Thank you
I
very much.
appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
for
nice to
letting me
meet
go
you.
first. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Bobby,
Thanks,
we'll
lady.
talk. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
we
you so
will.
much.
Thank you so much for being
You guys
here.
can take that on.
All right.
Thanks.
We'll go ahead and move back to item 3A, our FY '22 revenue report. Bobby, could you run us through
Yeah,
where we are on
if it would
this?
be okay with the committee, can I just defer that, and I'll address that in the budget presentation?
Sure. Ms. McKinney, could you give us an update on your internal audit activities?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I have developed a plan and working on getting with the department heads to create plan of corrective actions based on the last audit review. And as we report from the departments, I report those to the budget department. Still very heavily involved with JTA, working on some grant funding issues and contractual issues right now to ensure compliance in the area as we transition them more over to the city side. So that's where we are.
So, you've been working on JTA, I guess, on the items that were identified in the audit. You've got a plan on those. At our next meeting, could you present kind of your working plan for that? And then also, I want to make sure that we're addressing any deficiencies that were laid out in the comptroller's report.
Okay.
If you could bring those to us as well.
Yes.
That way, we can make sure that we're managing those correctly.
I will.
Any questions for Ms. McKinney on her internal audit activities? If not, we'll go ahead and move down to item 4B, our budget calendar. I guess we'll go ahead. Bobby, I'm just going to let you go. You may want to do it in another order.
Okay,
We'll
that'll
move
be
into
that'll be
those
fine.
discussions.
Thank you. I'll try to be a good steward of your time. We've got limited time left in an hour anyway, but there's quite a bit of information in your handout. I'll kind of address that as we go through it. But let me provide you an update on where we are at the budget, and through that, I'll also address this current year's revenue variances, if that's okay. Just, I know everyone, is aware of this, but the budget is a process and it takes time. And what we're gonna be looking at today is just kind of a snapshot of where we are today. And it continues to be a work in progress. We have March numbers this year that we were able to factor into these spreadsheets. Before we complete the process, we'll have April numbers as well, and we'll continue to update our annualized projections and so forth. So what you have there, what you have in your handout, you have a sheet that looks like this. Everybody can find that. This is just a summary snapshot of where we are today for what I would classify as major funds. In other, we don't have, Metro Police and drug funds and some of the smaller funds on here, but we'll begin to incorporate those as we progress through the budget. Let me speak first to the first couple of columns, the general fund, March annualized numbers, if you could find that on your spreadsheet. Right now, we are sort of projecting that we may end up somewhere in the $10.5 million surplus range this year. I have to be honest with you, that was surprised me when I saw that.
Yes.
However, I've done some research, and I want to issue you a couple of words of caution, about that number when you look at it. There's a couple of sheets this size that are in your handout, if you'll find those. The first one I'd like to speak to is the sales and hotel tax revenues for this year. Looks like this. And generally speaking, if you look at our revenues and expenses this year, year to date, a couple of just kind of general observations would be that we really do not have any material budget variances on the revenue side where we have fallen short of the budget, nor do we have any significant or material expense variances year to date where we've exceeded the budget. Now, there are one or two exceptions, but they're not material. Local sales tax and state sales tax, if you can see on your spreadsheet there, we're annualizing that to come in somewhere around $32 million for the year. Our budget was $28.1 million, so there's almost a $4 million positive variance there. And on the hotel tax, another couple of $100,000 this year where revenues have exceeded budgets. Now, that's no surprise. We've looked at those numbers, throughout the year. So that's a contributing factor to this projected surplus numbers for this year, right? Mm-hmm. Another contributing factor is a little bit more complicated. If you'll find this sheet here, it's headed up, transfers from fund balance. This has been a very active year in terms of transactions related to fund balance transfers, mm-hmm. and that does get a little bit complicated. So because in the governmental world, when you appropriate or amend your budget and you do it from fund balance, you actually have to record that as revenue, right? So we've got almost $18.7 million in revenues this year that are funded from our existing fund balance, if that makes sense. And I've listed those for you. The three big ones, and not to get into the weeds too much, but on the Arpa Fund, so we received the Arpa funds back in FY21. We had originally recognized those as revenue in FY21. One of the audit entries that was made was to take that out of revenue and put it in deferred revenue. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've drawn that down this particular year. And then at $6.9 million, you'll notice out to the right of that, I put we have transferred that to the Arpa Fund this mm-hmm. year. Well, that's an expense, right? Okay. Same thing, you'll recall the $4 million for street resurfacing, the $5.6 million for the industrial land. that we purchased. And I listed a number of other budget amendments that have been approved and are funded through fund balance this year. So that's about $18.7 million in revenues this year that, are funded from fund balance that won't necessarily repeat themselves next year, right? So that's the reason you see a pretty significant decrease from 96 million, 97 million to around 80 million in next year's budget. Now, a couple of other comments. The 6.9 for the ARPA, the 4 million for the street resurfacing, the 5.6 million for the land acquisition, those have already been transferred to other funds. So those, from a general fund standpoint, those are already expensed, right? Some of these other items, even ones like, let's just say, the grit prosecutor, I'm pretty sure that amendment was prepared such that that's an annual salary. I'm not sure when that transition took place. So some of that may or may not fall through to the bottom line this year in terms of income. But if you look at the last two, the police compensation and the fire department compensation, not that I would recommend we continue to operate this way moving forward, but historically what the city has done when they prepared budget amendments such as these, we've amended the budget for on an annual basis for the full cost of that. Now, the reality of things are that in the past, the city has budgeted for vacant positions in public safety areas in particular. And we have a history because of recruitment issues and people retiring that we have a history of not being able to fill those budgeted positions, right? So if you'll look at the footnote down at the bottom as it relates to, let's just look at the police department. So even with the adjustments that were made mid-year, and I've looked at this annualization 2 or 3 different ways, they're going to come in somewhere around $6.4 million at the end of the year, it looks like. Well, their budget for the year, including this budget amendment, is $7.8 million. And a similar analysis for the fire department, they're going to come in somewhere around 7.6 million or so, and the budget is 8.7 million. And that budget excess comes from a combination of their budget already included some vacant positions that they've not been able to fill, plus we amended the budget for the compensation increases. So you got the revenue, we're not going to incur the expense, and therefore a lot of that is falling through to the bottom line in this $10 million number. And of course, what will happen is that will go right back into our fund balance. It's kind of the way that will work. So now we will be analyzing in a little bit more detail, like when you eliminate or you kind of understand better what our bottom line will look like this year projected without these special types of transactions that involve fund balance. We'll continue to work on that and try to bring that number before we get through. But I felt like it was worth an explanation to help you understand it, the $10 million number this year.
No, not as pretty.
Yeah.
So you're saying that we still got a couple million more and stuff, and things hadn't hit the fund yet?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
going
so
to.
that's
Okay.
right. And some of the transfers, the revenue this year that have been transferred from the fund balance, that's a practice that we need to be careful about,
Yes.
and cautious about moving forward. And that
No.
might not repeat itself next year, right? Does that help?
Yes.
does.
Okay, so I took a minute to go through that, but I think that's important. Let me speak about next year's revenues as we sit here today. I think we have been appropriately conservative at this point in projecting next year's revenues. A couple of comments. We received kind of an official notice from the assessor's office earlier this week that the current reappraisal process, because of the market, is at a spot where it's never been before, and that has complicated the reappraisal process, not just here in Madison County, but across the state as well. And the state, as well as the local assessors across the state, are still working through the appraisal results. And matter of fact, they've suggested that it may be the end of May before that information is available to us. So currently, and just to kind of help everybody stay on the same page. The reason that's important is you know, the appraised values will eventually be updated sometime this month. A certified tax rate will be issued by the state, and a certified tax rate is designed such that, it's math, but it's designed such that the higher appraised values with the new certified tax rate would generate the same amount of tax revenues where we're at now. And the city will have a decision to make about whether to accept the certified tax rate or to set a tax rate that we feel like we need to fund the budget. Right, so that's it, and it's a quick summary, about as brief as you can summarize all of that. And so what's in the budget right now from a property tax standpoint is kind of where we are today. Right, so it's, property tax revenues are flat in next year's budget. The state, along with MTAS, has issued some projections on state shared revenues. I have factored those projections into the budget. You know, they're kind of based on a per capita basis. There is actually very little, if any, growth in those in aggregate. The reason for that is the state is projecting between a 1.7 and 2% decrease in sales tax collections for next year compared to where we've been this year. Now, this year is a record year. And even after the reduction next year compared to historically where we've been, it's still a big number, but there is a reduction. So that's sort of what's in there. I've got a hotels tax recommendation from Lori Nunnery. If I remember, it's 5 or 6% increase for next year. And we have gone through a process where our department directors have recommended certain kind of departmental, you know, fees and those type of things, revenues related to what their department generates. We've built those into the budget. So revenues right now are flat right now, and next year's budget is a good way of describing it. So on the expense side, let me speak to it very quickly, then I'll get to a point where we can talk about questions or discussion. It's a little bit deceiving because if you look at this summary schedule, it shows expenses down 2.6% from last year. But the reason for that is the, I don't know, what is it, 7, 11, 16, you know, about 16, 17 million dollars worth of expense related to transfers that we've made out of the general fund this year to those other funds. If you look just at the expense outside of that, the requested expense budget for next year is actually up, right? Everybody, that makes sense. Some of the key areas, salaries. So currently there are somewhere around, this is a difficult number here at the city to get your arms around with our processes and systems and so forth, but there are somewhere around 57 what I call vacant positions. I don't like to call them necessarily new positions because it gets confusing, but they're vacant positions or additional positions from a snapshot of the employee count that we took 2 or 3 payrolls ago, right? There's also about 31, around 31 kind of adjustments that in rates for select positions that have made their way through the approval process with the mayor's office. That's kind of in the salary budget as well. So salaries are up. You know, all of that together is, you know, is somewhere with benefits somewhere around $4.4 million, the cost of those.
Is the aggregate cost of those 57 vacant positions and the 31
right.
approved increases?
Yeah. And
what was that number again?
4.4 million.
Okay.
In round numbers. Just so you'll know about the health plan right now, we've done a lot of work on this. We've met with the mayor 2 or 3 times. We're projecting about, which is consistent with our historical trend, about a 5% increase in the cost or claims paid on our health plan. And you layer on, there's about $1.1 million of administrative fees that we pay to Blue Cross plus the premium on our reinsurance. So in total, it comes to about $9.8 million or so in costs related to the health plan. Currently, we have only factored in the current premium levels for contributions from our employees, no increase in the premiums. There's no plan redesign assumptions in here. The mayor has indicated a goal of his would be recognizing inflation impact that's have on our employees. We would prefer not to increase the cost of our health plan right now if we could avoid that. I know you've heard about the compensation study that's been conducted, that's complete. None of that cost or any form of that are in these numbers at this particular point. There are, as you might expect, if you go through the budget in detail, our department managers have experienced cost increases this year, and they've made an effort to allow for that next year. So if you look in areas of utilities, fuel costs, operating supplies, there's a general estimate or an effort to try to budget for anticipated cost increases next year in those areas as well. And finally, as we move to try to upgrade our technology, whether it's the new technology in the building department, or we are now in the process of implementing the Tyler Munis software here, there's, as you would understand from that, there's some technology costs related to that's in the budget as well. I'm going to hold off on the capital comments just for a second. If you look at the debt service numbers for now, there are essentially no change in debt service. There's the debt service requirements don't change that much for this next year. Now, you might recall that last year we did the capital outlay note with the police department. We did the capital lease for the fire equipment, but that's a full year of those factored in here and kind of our existing debt service. So really, that's pretty rather straightforward. From a capital standpoint, and Paul, I don't mean to get ahead of the agenda or how you want to handle
go ahead.
this. So kind of where we are on capital, we have the requested items and the update to the 5-year plan. You all have a copy of that. Spreadsheet looks like this one. Essentially, we don't have a finance plan or a funding plan at this point in place for that. I also want to mention, I know the mayor had to leave to be somewhere else, and Paul, please correct me if your understanding is different. There are 3 kind of significant capital items that I know about that's currently not on this particular report, not in this total. One would be the funding for the road for the Great Wolf Lodge. The second one would be there's some property acquisition related to the Bemis Greenway project. And the third one would be there's an assessment that's kind of a work in progress right now, the way I understand it, on the ballpark. Any capital improvements that might be needed at the ballpark. Now, so that's kind of where we are on capital today. I have had phone conversations with both PFM, our financial advisors from the last bond issue, as well as
Real quick, Bobby, you said those are not?
yeah, they're not
this?
included
Okay,
at this
I wanted
point.
to make sure.
Yeah. Also, with the Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund, there was really no surprises from those conversations. Rates are trending up, and they're probably going to be going up more. And the key to determining, what type of plan of finance we might need, if we even want a plan of finance, would be to determining what assets we want to finance and their useful life. And so there's a lot of work that remains on the capital. And now I will tell you that another thing that's kind of a work in progress right now that's rather hard to tie down. So I can look, we had a beginning fund balance in our capital outlay fund this year. We had a plan on how to spend it. We have spent some of it, but what I have to do between now and the time we complete this process is determine what carryover items, and there are definitions on how you can carry something over. what those carryover amounts will be for next year, because the way that those carryover amounts will be funded are from this year's ending capital fund balance, right? So we can't speculate, if you will, on taking some of that fund balance to fund new stuff necessarily, right? So another important note on the capital fund would be that I mentioned earlier, I think it's $5.6 million that we have invested this year in the industrial land acquisition. That transaction's closed, and just last week, I think it was last week, the transaction where we sold industrial land to Georgia Pacific, that transaction has closed as well. So the proceeds from the sale of that land was, I'm rounding numbers, but $8.7 million. That number is not reflected in the annualized projections for the capital outlay fund at this point. I'll have to update that. Just to kind of refresh everybody's memory real quick, and then I'll be quiet. Some of that land that we sold, we issued debt for back, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago or whatever, and there's another
200 acres.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, debt service remaining on that land. That council just needs to be aware of, and how you
Are
look
there
at-
any penalties for paying that off?
I don't think, I hope not, and surely we didn't.
Okay.
We didn't agree to that, but.
What's the remaining balance?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers. I had all that, and I can bring that back I know when there was a discussion about.
If I recall,
Yeah.
it was like we could net about $300,000.
Yeah, maybe, yeah,
And have 100 acres.
to sell.
Free and clear to sell that we're
Yeah.
no longer paying debt service on.
That may be true, allowing for the debt. That sounds right to me.
I think it was like 250 to 300.
Yeah. So I guess, whatever that number is, if in fact we want to account for the debt out of these proceeds, if that's, whatever that number is, would be available for some type of use. I know, the thought at the time was, we'll buy more industrial land and sell more land, hopefully. But that would be a decision that the council, would need to make, as well as what proceeds we might realize. There's another 100 acres, is that what it is? Round numbers, another 100 acres that's on the market now, so.
Do we have any rough estimate on the cost associated with the 3 items you mentioned, the Great Wolf?
What I've been told, I've asked about that. I talked to Stan Pilot this morning, issues. The design of the road for Great Wolf is actually in progress right now. We're funding the design as we go along. He was explaining to me this morning about when you bridge a waterway out there, you have to do a bunch of stuff more, and there's, anyway, it depends. But I think it would be safe to say the minimum on that is gonna be $7 million, and it could be $8 million.
Just for the road?
Well, the road and the things you have to do to build the road, yeah.
Right.
So
What was the second thing, Bobby? It was the road and then the ballpark, the maintenance.
Famous
property
Right.
acquisition.
Okay.
I
On
really,
that, we've had some preliminary discussion about funding that out of the bike and ped
right, that's right.
line item. I guess that's
There's $1
232.
million
There's $1 million
proposed
there.
right now.
Mhm.
Okay, right, that's right.
But from my understanding, they're trying to still get a cost on what that acquisition package would look
So we
like.
could use that money though for that.
That's what our preliminary
Okay.
discussions have been about.
The only thing I would caution everybody about is we don't have funding for that $1 million
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Yeah, exactly. So
We have
what I'm
funding for it,
saying
we could
is,
use it for that, but.
it wouldn't be in addition to the
Yeah.
million, that it could come from that
That's
million
right.
that
We
we
could
do
use
not
those
have
funds.
financing for
Yeah.
presently,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
The other two that I had, Bobby, were, getting some clarification on JTA's operation and capital
Okay.
requests.
Yeah.
And then also, the airport for some
Right,
improvements
right.
that I think could come down the pipe. I know you've reached out to
I have.
the
So
county.
I've reached out to the county in recent days, and they're about at the same spot the city is in the budget process. So you may know the city kind of is deferred kind of the funding request anyway for joint funded agencies. It goes through the county budget committee process, and we have funded what they recommend. So, none of that's available right now. I will tell you, I've factored in next year's budget, kind of what this year's budget was, for those agencies already in, it's already in next year's projections. So that's the status on that. On JTA, we requested a capital, what we tried to do is to, separate, if you will, distinguish, separate, whatever, capital request versus operating request. So they have completed a capital spreadsheet, looks like this. We have those numbers, they are not in there at this point. We also asked them to request an operating subsidy and to explain to the city how they plan to use the operating subsidy. So they did send a request. It's kind of in their budget for next year. I believe it was 600,000, if I remember right. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
On the operating side. So what that translates to is that operating subsidy plus their capital request for next year exceeds the current funding that we provide to JTA. So is that?
Yeah, I think you summarized it quite well.
That's kind of where we are.
I guess a couple of questions that I would have is, as we've listened to the opportunity that a fleet management proposal could have, and we look through these capital items, which would it be a good exercise for us to pull out some of these vehicles?
We could, and we have not done that yet, and we can certainly do that easily enough. Where we are, it gets a little confusing. Like accounting for leases, we got an expert here who can explain it better than I can. GASB 87, is that it? All it's currently changing for cities. So the way to think about that, you either have to fund the capital budget from a cash standpoint, or you have to fund the lease from an operating standpoint. It's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another. The accounting gets a little technical for it all. However, we could certainly, it probably would be helpful maybe to pull out the vehicles that are currently in the capital budget and that we might fund through the lease.
Mm-hmm. Just to look at what that option could look like.
We could do that. So I'll try to do that.
I was gonna ask that question. If we did go with this lease option, how would it affect our debt service versus a capital budget, things of that nature? And how would we realize that from an accounting standpoint? And how would it affect our, the working budget that we have to be certain that we're where we need to be?
Yeah, some of the thoughts that I've had on it and some conversations that we've had is maybe going about this and looking at different opportunities as they align with the service life, of the needs that we have. If it's vehicles and we can get those through a potential lease program and have those cyclically in place, we know we're going to have them replaced. And if we have other things that have a longer service life that may be more applicable for us to go after some kind of bond issue, those are the things we need. We need to start categorizing those.
Yeah, we can do that. Certainly do that. I've worked with Mary Elizabeth several times now. I felt like this proposal warranted consideration. What we decided to do is, we either can continue down the path of where we've been in terms of our fleet cost, or we can do something different. I think there's a lot about this proposal that's really attractive. Mm-hmm. Now, they've got really aggressive, as you might expect. They're in 5 years, we're going to go from an 18-year cycle on our vehicles to a 4-year cycle, and we're going to do that in 5 years. So that she's very knowledgeable. She's very efficient. She turns the numbers around really, really quick. So we can do that. And, we can look at that further. So
You ready to take other questions, or were you
Sure,
finished?
I'm done, that's all I'm just trying to explain kind of the big points about where we are. I will tell you in your handout, there's detailed revenue expenses that you can look at.
Well, the first one was 4.4 million for the compensation added to, but we had the salary study, but you said that did not include.
No.
So is the 4.4 million just what the mayor and you all have gone over?
Well,
just
most
for
of the, most of the,
raises?
most of the 4.4 million, most of that number would be 57 positions that are currently not filled.
Not, okay.
There are isolated numbers where there's been, requests to adjust salaries on a select number of positions have at least been approved to be put in the budget. But that's what that 4.4 million, and none of the cost related to the comp study is currently included in this number.
So a similar question on the salary
The
piece
raises.
there. So if you look through the expenses, several departments have pretty substantial increases in salaries of
Right.
20% or more.
They do.
So is that based on hiring more positions?
Well, let me tell you kind of how that
raises,
breaks out.
or-
So the police department has 22 positions in their budget that are currently not in their staffing numbers.
Okay.
The fire department has 17. In addition, the fire department, and I wish somebody was here, I've not been involved in these discussions, so I'm really speaking, just based on what I know. But the fire department has proposed to move all of the current firefighter 1s to firefighter 2 positions, with the exception of they just hired 6 or 8, whatever the number was.
Okay.
So that's included. There are, so that's the police department and the fire department, and then there are 18 positions that kind of fall outside of public safety, or outside the police, fire department, that are kind of spread throughout the rest of the operation.
Okay. And then so you mentioned we've got the study back. Well, I guess it's not been distributed to us yet, but how do we, from here,
Yeah.
and this is a question for the mayor, but how is that being assessed
Yeah.
in the council's review
Yeah.
mapped on
Right.
top of what we have, what
Yeah.
we
So
need,
those raises have not been
Yeah.
accounted for?
Yeah.
Is that-
raises and/or, I guess I'm not assuming everybody gets a raise on the compensation study, but
So the study, let me share with you what I know, because I've been in a couple of meetings with the mayor in this inning. So the study is complete. It's a big number. The mayor has looked at a couple of recommendations from his perspective on how let's take a step this next year, if we can. Those are sizable numbers. Any
Sure.
step you take is particularly when you start considering benefits, right, related to that. I understand the consultant is here this afternoon at 2:00, meeting with the mayor and Ms. Enning. I've been invited to sit in. I don't know if others are meeting or not. So it's the way that I can describe it, and I have some experience with these, when I was with the health system first, so I've done this several different times, and sort of what the consultant did, he just kind of took kind of where we are right now in terms of job grades and which job fits in what job to grade, and all of those relationships that we have now, right? And then he benchmarked the salaries. And as you might expect, when you do that, kind of internal relationships between certain positions that exist today, right, in certain job grades, and then you look at the impact of his benchmarking salaries in the market, it would be the right word. It impacts some of those internal equity relationships that exist today, right? Sure. So Ms. Henning, to her credit, she's concerned about that, and I understand that's part of what the meeting this afternoon is going to be about, so. Okay. So, I mean, that's a summary, you know, of where we are today. Obviously, there's a lot of work that has to be done in the next few weeks, so.
Well, to that point of if, with the certified rate that we may not get until May, potentially with the
End of May, yeah.
values and
Right.
the issues there. I mean, we've got to approve balanced budget by June,
We do.
right? So we're kind of putting all that together, and then that hits in May, and then that may or possibly shuffle up.
Right. There's a couple of options, I think, related to the operating budget as well, maybe as related to the capital budget. By the way, on the capital, I failed to mention, you know, we have the Arpa funds in a separate fund, right? Most of what's in that this year and next year is capital in terms of meeting the definition of our capitalization policy, but not all of it. And we have an FY '23 proposed project list for ARPA, but it hadn't been visited in a while, and it doesn't total up to the total amount of money that we're gonna have available, so that one's kinda in flex as well. But specific to your question, and the other thing I failed to say on the reappraisal process and the certified tax rate, the state has, they've clarified the rules and they've made some changes, so there's a process we have to go through, and so what the city will have to do, the city will be provided the certified tax rate, and the city will have to recognize, that's a good word, recognize the certified tax rate. And then if the city chooses to not adopt the certified tax rate, for instance, keep the current tax rate, then there's a public notice that's pretty clear. I mean, they write it for you. And there's a public notice and a public hearing that's required, that would require the city to vote to not accept certified tax rate and to set the tax rate that they wish to set for next year. Now, where I've got a call in, and Fancher, you may know, I don't really know, the stuff we got from the comptroller's office is a little confusing, because, you know, when you, when the council approves the budget ordinance at 2 public hearings, included in that ordinance sets the tax rate. So I'm not sure if those public notices and those hearings are sufficient for what the comptroller's saying you have to do now, or if we have to have a separate one just for the tax rate. I'm not real clear on that.
Do you have a feeling of what that will be, or how much
Well, I mean,
difference it will be?
How much money? No. I can tell you what it worked last time.
Yeah.
So last time, which was back in, 19, I believe it was. I think there was, I think there was 7 or 8 cents difference in the tax rates. And the city elected to keep their current tax rate rather than going with a certified tax rate. And that generated about 1.6 or $7 million by doing that. You know, same tax rate as before, but higher appraised and assessed values. I think just from feedback I get from the assessor's office, I mean, obviously, we all know what the market's crazy today.
Yeah, if
and
it's consistent with
Yeah.
what the market shows, you've got an 18% increase
Yeah,
for
yeah.
2020.
I think that's what they're struggling with, is the volatility
Yeah,
that they've seen, and, you know, setting an assessment for a 4-year period and not knowing how that's gonna shake out.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you're setting a
Yeah,
set, so
you can't.
from some of the emails, it looks like they're gonna go back and review, their assessment and may reassess some things
Yeah.
prior to any potential challenges
I
to.
mean, currently, a penny on our tax rate today is about $175,000 every penny. If that helps you any. So it would be a big number. I would expect the difference to be like big.
It's
So,
gonna be a little scary.
and I think the way it works, you know, our discussion has been, well, the certified tax rate, or we kind of keep the tax rate where, but I think, you know, in theory, maybe we do, or we elect not to go with a certified tax rate. Anything above it could be a lower tax rate than what we have now, right? But still above the certified tax rate, and then
To fund
generates all
what the necessary,
Yeah,
the budget is
right.
necessary.
So, So another, related to that, I don't know how the schedule will work. I will tell you, the property taxes, that revenue that I've got in the budget right now, that I have right now are conservative every year, at least in the last 2 or 3 years. I don't know, there's $300,000 or $400,000 growth in property tax revenues or something like that. I don't have that factored in here yet, but that's not gonna fix where we are with our budget right now either. So, I mean, I guess in theory, if it's not available, the city could pass a budget ordinance with whatever tax rate the city chooses. And then if later on in June, or later on in July or whatever, the certified tax rate, and that process starts, the city could look at it and decide what they want to do and do a budget amendment. I mean, that would be one way of doing it.
Got new people coming in, that's always a good time to do that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Well, it's just something we're gonna have to keep a close eye on, specifically for the next 2 years on the revenue piece from the sales tax, because we're entering, this next budget season will be the first one we've had since 1920 where there's been no economic stimulus dollars
Yeah, I
issued.
agree, yeah.
And then with the inflation piece,
Sure.
specifically the last 3 months, what we've seen,
Yeah.
will that cause a scale back
Yeah.
on
In
consumer spending?
consumer, yeah, and I understand that.
I feel confident that we are going to keep a close eye on it, but those are just some of the things that
No, you're exactly,
cross
you're
my mind,
exactly
and
right.
conservative is best.
The state did their projections on state shared revenue probably, it's been at least a month ago, or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks ago, and I know the Fed apparently is, every indication is they're getting ready to take some strong action on rates, which could slow demand, consumer demand even more, lower sales tax than even what we're projected now. So we'll have to watch it very closely, yeah.
It's been a roller coaster.
I'm telling you.
Well, there's a little hope with the
economic
leasing
conditions they haven't seen in
program,
40
if you would
years.
go
Exactly.
ahead and
They
look
don't know
at
what
that
to
and see how
make of it.
aggressive we could be with that.
Yeah, and then the way that I would look at it is kind of carve out the vehicle piece. But, it's a cash thing.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it comes
Right.
down to, because you have to pay for it one way or the other. But y'all be happy to do that. I know there's a lot of interest in that, and I think that proposal is,
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good proposal, but
Sound like
it seems
Yes.
to me, wherever the city goes, if you go that direction, it's kind of something you need to stay in. You don't.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a long,
Yeah, I agree with
right.
that.
it's a longer term commitment.
That's
Yeah, it
right.
is.
Yeah, it's not, hey, let's do this year and
Right.
sell 200
Yeah.
vehicles
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're out next year.
And that's one of the reasons I asked about the longevity
Yeah.
of those
Yeah.
relationships with other municipalities, just to make sure there's not.
But I wish
Turnover.
that's what we would do, is 5 and 10-year plan. Bobby, can I go back to the 4.4 million again? I still, with the salary study and that
That
4.
doesn't include the salary.
Right,
Okay.
but, so we've got to get to a place where we know there's gonna be raises from what the salary study is telling us. So with the enterprise carving that out, I'm just still concerned that we're gonna have quite a bit of an increase. Maybe not everything that the salary study said, but we're gonna have to have an increase in that compensation area.
I know that the mayor, the council would not, I know that's been the goal of the council and the mayor. I mean, why do you do the study? You
Right.
try to address it. I think everybody would like to see that happen, particularly in today's environment with inflation
Yeah.
and how that impacts our employees. I agree with you.
I think, the reason why we push for this, Ms. Wallace, is so that we can be competitive. I think that's why we
Absolutely.
all went for this.
Absolutely.
And I think there is some things that we can do, looking at those 57 vacant positions. We've carried, as he stated, 22 and 17, we've carried those all year long, budgeted. We haven't expended those.
Right, right.
And that's been the discussion that we've been having for the last couple of years, is do we need to put, and Bobby, you'll help me with the terminology
Yeah.
here, but
So-
kind of a bracketed,
Yeah. So what I would recommend, and, not that the health system is, what everybody else needs to look like, but you know, these types of issues were prominent at the health system, and most other, not just ours, but other health systems generally have what I refer to as a position control list. In other words, these are based on volumes and that type of thing. These are the numbers of positions that if you, you know, that you can fill or you can hire, you should be recruiting for or whatever. Now, that list would be fluid. It could change. It could increase, it could decrease, whatever. But you have a list. But that's kind of an HR tool in a department. This is what you're always trying. And then you have your budget, because the police department and fire department have lots of turnover, as do all of our other, so no, and we've got all of these positions in there July 1, right? Well, you know, we clearly, and usually what you do is you apply to that position control list, you apply what's called an unfilled factor.
Okay, just a portion.
Right,
maybe.
yeah,
Okay.
that recognize from a budget standpoint that you don't need all these dollars for all these, because you can't hire them all by July 1 anyway, and you're gonna have turnover. So you've got that approved list that you can strive to get to in terms of field position, but your budget is different. The budget is prepared to recognize reality, right?
So that could free up some of that
Sure, I
4.4
could-
million
yeah, I
to
can see
allocate
it.
towards any salary adjustments that we need.
Yeah, and
potentially
I
need to
agree
make.
with all that, but I just feel like it's gonna be, we really need to get a handle on that sooner than later.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And I will tell you,
We're
there,
really
we're
behind on our raises.
working to try to get our arms around, there's, as y'all know, there's lots of grants, and it's a difficult thing to kind of tie down, so some of these numbers will move as we reconcile and try to account for all the grants, the JTA thing, the joint funding requests that come through,
TDEC.
the county, yeah, the TDEC issue. I just realized since I was sitting here, you know, for instance, not to single out anybody, but, you know, the chamber asked for, there was I saw it on that budget amendment list. Well, I don't have that additional $75,000 in next year right now. And, you know, things like that. There's just a lot of loose ends that will change these numbers. Some, maybe not materially, so that's kind of where we are today. I guess it really, Paul, kind of, or Councilman Taylor, kind of comes down to the process from here to the finish line.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's just tight.
yeah.
Well, and you know, it doesn't help not having some of these revenue projections to, you know, if we're waiting. I think the way that you're going about it now is the way to go about it. Set this baseline
Yeah.
based off of what last year's revenues are. Move forward, try to budget as conservatively as possible. Now, is it a September deadline? Isn't there a deadline on any changes to property tax rates? I could be wrong about that. So it seems like there's a
Could be,
September.
I don't know, I'm really not.
In order for them to be able to get those out.
I was thinking it was August 31st.
Is it August?
Yeah, well, you know, there's the Board of Equalization Appeal,
Yeah.
there's the appeal process, which you should anticipate, or we should anticipate, you know.
I don't think that they appeal. Yes, I'd imagine a lot will
Yeah,
appeal.
be a lot
They're just
more of
appealing
that.
their assessed
Yeah,
value.
exactly, yeah. So, yeah, there probably is. Yeah, I mean, there are limits on the process, right? So to get the bills out, the property notice is out October 1st. That in a normal year is a time-consuming, complicated process. So, yeah, there's gotta be, you know, at some point where they have to stop.
Yeah.
You know, all the appeals, you know, they have to set it, and all the appeals have to be heard.
That's why I think it's also, because I think
Yeah.
it's 60 days before
Okay,
it goes
could be.
out, so
Yeah.
that's.
Could be.
So, okay, so that would really just only give us another month past the consideration of the budget. What, July?
2 months.
2 months.
Yeah.
2 months.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So right now, it looks like we've got kind of a $4 million separation from expenses in the general fund.
We do.
It looks like we're, as far as the other funds go, we may see a surplus, or we're projecting a surplus.
Yeah, I'm working through that's the most difficult one, is the capital fund. To try to figure out, you know, where we're gonna be on capital projects at June 30th, so that what does get carried over, make sure we got a fund balance, you know, for it. So that that will continue to be right up to the last day, you know, kind of work in progress. Debt service is pretty much set, you know, now. You know, I'm trying to think all the other, you know, the police drug, the metro drug, the CRA fund, all of those other minor funds will come together without any problem.
Okay. Any other questions on our budget calendar or budget discussion? If not, we'll move to our final item. For the last couple of months, we've been talking about this committee and its roles and duties moving forward. I'd like to just continue to give an opportunity at these meetings for us to discuss what kind of the standardization of what this committee sees in the future. I know as we've just gotten through, we've done a lot with you know, the budget and budget guidance, but and also in considering different financing opportunities. In the past, I talked a little bit about making sure that we had budget ordinances come through here, and I think standardizing that moving forward could help future leadership to have kind of a pre-built agenda on the things that would come here. I'd just kind of like to open it up if you guys have had an opportunity to think about this at all, on what this committee could look like from a budgeting standpoint moving forward, especially kind of that in situ budget that we go through during the year.
One thing that I was thinking of that has kind of come up recently is, you got to give some categories to it because you don't want to look at everything, but as contracts come up, I guess in conjunction with the city attorney, like on an annual or quarterly review of those, one that I think of is with the cleanup. We thought we had a contract, I believe, with Ford Construction, and apparently that had been under a renewal process and we hadn't really kept up with it. And so when we tried to exercise that for some of the cleanup, they were able to opt out, or I'm not sure all the details on that. But I think having those that do really impact the budget, again, in conjunction with the city attorney, could be helpful for this committee to review. Again, you don't want every little thing to come through here, but the major ones.
Really through purchasing, too.
And then if we were to go into like a lease scenario with Enterprise, like stuff like that I think would be helpful for this committee to have an eye on. Again, there's others that are doing that, but just as it's informing our decisions, I think that would be something that should be standard, not as just a one-off when they come up.
Okay. Any thoughts on kind of the threshold of what those would look
Yeah,
like?
I almost think of it like as a projected expenditure or cost savings and setting a certain dollar. I don't specifically know
Like
how you
impact
do
to
that.
Well,
But
for
something that
instance,
could have a financial impact from the expenditure side or cost savings, so
Right,
like with contract review or like with the leasing or debt service possibilities.
Setting that dollar amount.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe
I'd have to do
that-
more
and
thought.
that's some
thinking
of
on
that, that's some of that we don't really know. For example,
Right.
like the police cars. We didn't know what the actual realized, we knew there was a potential for some lower rates and some
Yeah.
realization of savings.
Mhm.
We get into it, then we start to realize, okay, we can save significant dollars by going in a different financing direction. As far as budget amendments, I think it's healthy for us to be able to kind of review those. I think having this a week out from our agenda review gives us enough time to kind of have those together. Bobby, I'll let you weigh in on that. But I think it is some of those come to us, not all of those come to us. But significant ones, I think, should be
Right.
looked at here so that we can provide a recommendation.
And I'm not aware of any, the mayor's not made me aware, or am I aware of any significant or material budget amendments council's gonna see this month, other than probably recognizing the revenue from the proceeds of the land sale.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, you don't have to appropriate that money, but we do need to amend our budget to recognize
Okay.
Mhm.
the sale.
And I think these would be, recognizing revenue. I don't know where that really matters here, but making decisions on, compensation or capital expenses that happen throughout the year, or these large transfers, having those come us look at it, analyze it, and be able to make a.
Well, you know, I wish when the transfers from fund balance were approved, I wish I had surfaced the discussion about the accounting, the impact. You know, it's one thing if you move money from fund balance to revenue and you spend the money, right?
Mhm.
That becomes really clear. But when you do some of the transactions that we elected to do this year, it operation per se would not generate $10 million for this year, but because of the accounting surrounding that, it's gonna be there. We can do a better job, with that. The mayor and I have had some discussions. I know there's a pending, elevator repair on this elevator, wherever it is now. That's, I don't know, it's $60,000 or $70,000, if I remember right. The tendency in the past has been, the city just does a budget amendment. We don't really aggressively go and look about, funds that are already budgeted and moving them, for something. We can probably improve on that process as well. And while I'm speaking, if I could get back up on the budget, on this summary sheet, I just want to point out, we didn't talk about the solid waste fund, but it's going through some material transitions right now. So the solid waste fund is on target right now to generate a sizable surplus this year. And that changes quite dramatically next year. And what's driving that are flat revenues, basically, and the escalator clauses that are in the waste management contract and the contract with the landfill operator, where those costs are pegged to certain inflation indicators and measurements. And so the cost of those contracts, those service contracts that we pay for with waste management and the landfill operator in particular, are going up dramatically next year. So, okay. Just want to point that out. Failed to mention that.
Well, Chairman, let me ask you, and I'd love other individuals who serve on the city council, what your thoughts are on setting that threshold with your experience working on the city council. What do you think your constituents would be happy to see from a threshold standpoint if it's over a certain amount, having it vetted by our committee here? Just in your experience.
Yeah, I'd let the other council members answer first. I've got my opinion. I'm not trying, I didn't mean to put anybody on the spot, but I guess I kind of did.
I don't know if I've got you.
I don't know if it's really a category issue or an amount issue.
Okay.
I think there's been some discussion brought up about it to make sure we have enough steps, really vetting the process. So I think it would kind of depend. Sometimes it's really, what is it about?
Yeah.
What is that category versus how much is it going to cost?
Okay.
If that, that's just what comes to my mind. So that's not answering your question, but.
Well, I mean, I may be saying the same thing you're saying, but I don't know the exact dollar amount, like in that swing. But I've gotten quite a bit of feedback from people in the community that are thankful for this committee kind of doing the deep dive and digging into this stuff. And as a member of this committee and then on the council, I appreciate that from this committee. And when there's other committees, and again, no disrespect to any other council members, but sometimes when you're on the council and you get these things brought to you, and depending on when you get the information, you don't have the time or the resources to really do that deep dive. And so if you trust the committee and can rely that, okay, I know they did the homework and did the deep dive. Again, you need to process it yourself as a council member, but I think there's huge benefit to that when you're making those decisions that we're voting on, representing our constituents. So I don't know if that's what you're getting. I know you guys a specific number,
but actually that, to me, that's saying that under this committee, you almost feel like that threshold should be lower than higher, because it helps us vet those items and helps the council operate more efficiently, because those items are being vetted, whether it's a 2-minute conversation or a 30-minute conversation. it's coming as a recommendation from the budget committee.
I think
That's-
anything council can understand, then our constituents understand better. And what I would like to just see from this committee is that each time we have a 2 or 3 minute synopsis to understand what you all understood through this hour today.
Mhm.
And then therefore, we can explain it better. We do trust the process of this committee. We need it desperately. But I think that also we need to educate all of the council that are willing to go through that process, and then therefore we can explain it better. So again, it's not really an amount or an issue, it's just the fact that y'all are really doing it, but then we need to understand what y'all went through.
To me, I'm
It's
not
time.
a member, but I have a thought. I mean, what makes sense to me, kind of. So the budget comes through this committee. It sort of makes sense to me that all budget amendments.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of them are
Yes.
routine, you know, but we're amending a budget that you approved. That sort of makes the most sense to me. I think a lot of the discussion about the budget amendments, and I know we've talked about it before, may have to do with, just send all budget amendments here, but, you know, even the ones that are approved by the mayor. I guess we do a lot of budget amendments for things that are really immaterial and kind of just operational in nature, but because of what our guidelines are, we have to bring them to the council rather than the mayor approving them and just presenting to you a list at the next meeting of what they are. I mean, that's to me kind of where the
I think
focus
so,
of the
and it
discussion.
just gives us an opportunity
Yeah.
to ask
Yeah,
questions, and,
absolutely.
you know.
Yeah, if you see something, if we
Something's ailing
identify
us.
something that needs to be
Yeah.
pulled
Just-
out
just-
and examined, yeah, we can do that.
That's all.
go
that
through
We
really
just
needs
have
be
to
done.
adjust, and I cannot speak for the mayor, I want to be perfectly clear on that, and I'm not speaking for him. But, you know, we would just kind of have to adjust internally, like today, at noon today is the agenda deadline, so I got to run upstairs and do mine here in a minute. But, you know, if we could just adjust the schedule just a little bit, we could just as easily, I'm getting ready to do them here, and we could just bring them in, so here's the amendments for this
Right.
month.
Yeah,
And it
just
may
have
be
room
we
before.
Yeah.
move it to the Tuesday
Yeah,
or
whatever,
something
yeah.
prior
Yeah.
and give you a couple extra
Yeah.
days to be able to generate those.
Yeah, now, things that, you know, y'all mentioned contracts and other decisions that are not necessarily just strict, the budget amendment process is not that complicated to me, that's what I would do. if it was
Those
me.
aren't the most common items,
Yeah, that's right, but some of
Most
the,
common
you
items are a
know,
bit smaller.
contracts now have to come to the council
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
You know, whether the council says we would feel better if they went through the budget committee or not, it's kind of just a
I
council
think anything that
decision.
can, it really gives
You
us
know,
that second layer, and I think that's what it was intended to do.
Well, to your point, you know, we can look at it and like we have with, you know, significant things that we've looked at, we come and I'll present, you know, these are the things we looked at. Here are some spreadsheets on the way that we analyze, for instance, the police cars. We kind of broke that down in the different options that we had and we made the recommendation on one of those options. And so we can do that, you know, with those significant items. But also I'm hearing from you that, you know, just a monthly quick report. And most of the time, what we've been doing, this is where, you know, I'm glad this discussion has taken us. Most of what we have done over the last year, with the exception of fire department, police department, salary review, has been like budget process calendars type of things. And I can present that, but I'm sending you guys the calendars and as we modify those. But we can continue to update those monthly at our agenda review meetings. That way everybody's aware of it. I think you got a good point on that.
Yeah,
And this is probably getting,
I was gonna say, I'll remind you that whatever changes you make, don't forget to change the bylaws as well.
Yeah, so that's, you know, you see on there, well, one, what we would change is the ordinance. So we're involved, Councilwoman Wallace and myself are involved in the ordinance process, Ms. McKinney as well. And so as we look through these, we would change the ordinance to say, you know, all budget amendments come through here and significant contracts as you know, as deferred by the council, or if the council would send it down to us, we can look at it, you know. But that's, yes, we'll be adjusting that.
and this is getting off, I mean, but I think it is important too for you three, especially that are not elected to the council, I think the public really appreciates that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And if
That's
I
what
took
we
off my
need.
city council hat and had no idea how this operates, because there can be a perception, right, of like,
Oh.
oh, council's just kind of running through this, or
No,
they're all elected.
absolutely.
So I think
Business
you
people.
guys add a key component to this.
Absolutely, very much so.
Well, based on the conversation, I think,
Thinking
I mean, I
something
think
or-
I would be in favor of, all budget amendments run through this committee
Okay.
to be vetted.
Do we want to go ahead and recommend that as a recommendation to the ordinance committee for them to review?
I would like to hear from the professionals, what, just any thoughts or how. You are, I'm talking about the paid employees for the city.
I'm joking.
I agree with the budget amendments, and as far as contracts, to keep from being bogged down, I would like to see a dollar limit on that, not looking at every contract, especially looking at levels of 10,000 or more, if you all are comfortable with that, because if not, you're gonna have so many,
Oh, yeah.
low-level contracts
And I think that
to
needs
review.
further review. I just felt like I was reminded of it this week with some issues that potentially could have material costs to it. So there definitely has to be a
Right.
threshold and parameters around that, but,
Do we
Thank
want to
you.
do some more discussion about this, or, I'm willing to make a motion that moving forward, we have at least all budget amendments, we can talk about contracts and those
I
thresholds.
think we could do the budget amendment one
Yeah. Okay.
now. And I guess do we have a timeline of like, hey, when do we want to have this standardized list put together? Do we need to kind of,
Where I was going with this was moving into next year.
okay.
So as.
What is
we-
our term?
Our term, we're on the same
Same,
term as
okay.
the city.
Is it
Yeah,
okay?
so our terms would be July 1.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Which is when the new iteration of this committee would happen.
Yeah, okay.
So mine was, what I was trying to do is establish over the next couple of months
Okay.
what that looks like.
Yeah.
Can you say the motion?
I'd entertain a motion for all budget amendments moving forward to come through this committee.
So moved.
Second.
And that would come as a recommendation
That's
to the
right.
council. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition, say nay. Hearing none, motion passes. Any other discussion on anything that we've had today? If not, I appreciate everybody's time. Johnny, thank you
Yeah,
for your
really,
time.
Thank y'all.
And
This would not be.
thank you all very much, and let me know if anything pops up
May
between now
19th
and
is the next meeting.
May the 19th will be our next meeting. Thank
Man,
you.
I got a
Thank you.
wild